We try to operate as efficiently as we possibly can at the diocesan level, because you, the churches and missions of the diocese, are the real operating agents. You're the ones who actually reach individuals with the gospel. And so we want to do our best to support you, but to do that economically, very effectively and efficiently. And so we try not to spend more than we absolutely have to. And so this year, our budget is essentially the same as it was for last year, except it's exactly $12,000 larger. The reason for that is that as Bishop John mentioned earlier this morning, the ACNA decided that the provincial level decided to provide $24,000 a year instead of $12,000 a year to help offset the cost of Bishop John being away in his responsibilities of Dean of Provincial Affairs for the whole church, and so for the whole denomination. So we upped the budget by $12,000 because it was given to us, right? But we're not asking that $12,000, of course, or the additional $12,000 they gave us last year to come from the individual churches. So that's why it's only $12,000 larger. If you look down at the expenses, we will give 10% of our budget ourselves back to ACNA. That's 10% without deducting the $24,000, so we get a big hunk of that back in that sense. We also intend to provide a 10% increase in the Great Commission Committee's budget for next year. The Great Commission Committee is really perhaps our most important function in supporting all of you and in spreading the gospel with new church plants and missions. And we don't think we can give them enough, really, in a way. So if we're going to increase the budget anywhere, that would be the place to do it. We've also had to increase the travel budget for two reasons. One is we overspent it this year, in 2015, because at the beginning of the year, we did not have a canon for church planning. We did at the beginning of the year, but we didn't at the end of 2014 when we established the 2015 budget. So when we did get our canon, Tom Herrick became part of the staff. Then he travels a lot, and for good reasons. And so therefore we overspent the budget. So the increase for next year, to a certain extent, represents the fact that we are now budgeting for the first time in 2016, the travel expenses that the canon will incur to do his duties. And so I think that's the main increases on the first page. If you'll turn to the second page, under payroll, it's somewhat larger than last year, and that's for a couple of reasons. One is we increased this, we provided a cost of living adjustment or increase to the compensation of all of our staff members of 1.7%. And part of Canon Herrick's cost is just an accounting movement. He doesn't need a housing allowance because it's covered from his other job, and so therefore all of his compensation is now in cash compensation instead of the housing allowance. So that's why cash compensation is larger. Housing allowance is smaller than last year for the same reason. We do have one other change to the cash compensation. Last year, Canon Mary Hayes's compensation was shown in the consultants line because she had a position in Pittsburgh as well. This year, our accountants tell us she needs to move to the compensation of employees or staff line, and so that's just an accounting change as to which line the compensation for her occurs, and that. We get the money from that out of the $24,000 that the province provides to us. The only other change you'll notice that's sizable, if you look down under administrative, you'll see something called contingency miscellaneous. And last year it was $30,000, and you can see through October we had spent very little of that. We will not have much of a contingency miscellaneous line in 2016. It'll only be $2,000 instead of $30,000. And the reason for that is we don't need it anymore. We have been blessed over time through the gifts and to the diocese from all of you, such that we have accumulated cash reserves of about $370,000, which is at least a little over 4 months of operating expenses for the diocese. We don't need to accumulate any more. Even if something awful happened, we could probably handle it. And so we will not be adding to cash reserves until such time as there's some big drop in them for some unforeseen reason, and we need to ask again in some later year's budget. But that's not likely to happen either. So we're in good shape and probably won't be having much in that category anymore. And so you see at the bottom of the line, the expenses match the income budgeted. And so that's what we're asking from the churches. Now, this year, as you know, this 2015 year, we started the year by asking the congregations and churches to provide a percentage of their operating income as opposed to some proportion of their share of attendance in the diocese, their church's share of that attendance being the basis for allocating the budget. That has worked very well. The amount of funds we brought in is just about exactly what we budgeted for, asking 4.1% of each church's operating income. So we plan to do that again for 2016. We have no reason to believe it wouldn't work just as well then. And so the last page of the document I ask you to pull out is a pledge sheet where we're asking each church to fill in that they will pledge 4.1% of their operating income for 2016, and then to estimate. That's all it is an estimate, not a commitment, to estimate what you think that 4.1% will be. Then if over the course of the year, you bring in a lot more income, each church brings in a lot more income than expected, well, then it'll provide more to the diocese. But if it has the opposite effect and it gets less than expected, it'll be allowed to pay less then, because it'll just be a percentage and not a flat amount. And so that's what I have to say to you today. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions if any of you have one. Yes, sir. Okay, it's not on.
Yes, good afternoon, sir. Andy Terry from All Saints. I'm looking at the line item for computer hardware, software, and support.
Yes.
Given the age of our diocese and given the end-of-life costs for IT resources such as computers and printers, do you see a need for this to be any higher than 5,000 as computers start die and go to computer heaven there?
Well, we have been replacing them over time. We only have a handful of staff members, so we don't have that many computers in the diocesan office. But it's possible it could be more. If it turned out to be more, we could take that out of any line item that's underspending or out of our reserves if we needed it. But this has been about what we've been spending each year, and I think we've been tending to replace one computer a year in any event. Okay. Any others? Okay.
Is there a motion that the budget be accepted as presented? John Newsom moved and Javoke seconded. All further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? With thanks to you all for your commitment and partnership in hearing things And I will also mention Ed Spear, member of the Standing Committee and member of All Saints, is the chair of the Finance Committee. That's very much involved in working with the treasurer on the presentation of the budget. Thank you, Ed and team, for your good work as well. We'll now turn to Constitution and Canons. Kevin Marshall of Restoration Church in Arlington is the chair of the committee. Kevin's a very experienced and skilled attorney, a partner at Jones Day Law Firm, and a former Deputy Assistant Attorney General, as I recall. Lots of credentials. Kevin, would you come up and make your report?
Thank you, Bishop John. Credentials or not, the way I got this job and received it from the committee was in absentia. So I think there's a lesson there on the importance of making it to committee meetings. The job of the Constitution and Canons Committee is to make recommendations to you, the Synod, on potential changes in the Constitution or the canons. This year, as the bishop mentioned in his report, we have 2 recommended changes to the canons. The details and the reasons are in your report, which you received by email in September, and it's the green thing in your packet. So it's a 1-page report, and then the actual proposals are after that. But before I get into that, I was asked to say a few words about Ken Bracey, and I am happy to do so. He was the secretary of our committee, and he died unexpectedly this summer. He was a longtime member of Epiphany. More recently, though, he had moved to Williamsburg to help plant Incarnation Church, because what else would you want to do when you're late in life and retired but pick up, move to a new place, and help start a brand new church? He'd had lung problems for a very long time, but it looked like he was getting better, and so I felt like I could bother him a little bit more. And so I sent him an email in late May asking him to help with some committee matter. He emailed me back very quickly and said, "Kevin, I would love to help. It might be about a week before I get back to you, though, on that, because I just had a lung transplant." But that response tells you a lot about Ken and his attitude toward the church and toward helping other people. But 2 weeks later, I got the news from the diocesan office that he had died. And the day I learned that, I sent an email to my committee, and I'd like to read you one part of what I wrote about Ken that day, if my phone cooperates. I met Ken in the early days of the Anglican District of Virginia, 2007 or 2008, just after the split from the Episcopal Church, when he and I found ourselves on the first Constitution and Canons Committee, I as chairman, and none of us sure what to do with ourselves in a new and messy situation. In a difficult time, Ken was a valuable Nathaniel. It was a pleasure to work with him, and I've been eager to do so again. It is also evident that he deserves a great deal of credit for establishing the full Constitution and Canons when ADV became a diocese, and that it was and remained a labor of love for him. He served the church well and faithfully. I trust that he is being told that now, a sheep of Christ's own fold, a lamb of his own flock, a sinner of his own redeeming. But I will miss him, and that remains true. In much more mundane matters, we do have 2 resolutions to talk about. I'll address the first. This would delete one sentence from the canon that addresses lay representation at Synod. As a result of that deletion, there would no longer be an extra lay delegate for congregations or missions without permanently assigned clergy, and that is the term of art which the bishop mentioned in his report. In our experience with that provision over the last 4 years or so, it's proven confusing to apply. It's inconsistent with how representation actually works at the Synod, and a language like that is unknown in other dioceses. I'll add one note. We heard from some of the churches that closed down earlier today. One of the things I love about the committee is that the members are not at all parochial. This change originated with a member of our committee from a church that actually benefited from the provision. And it's very large of him to push it upon us. He, in fact, was quite persistent in getting us to take it seriously, and I was grateful for it. Actually, Andy Orovitz, and I noticed he's here today. So with that, on behalf of the committee, I move that the Synod adopt Constitution and Canons Resolution 1 as contained in our report.
Alex? The motion coming from a committee does not require a second. It's before you. Is there any discussion? Ready to vote? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Adopted.
All right, thank you. One more to go. Constitution and Canons Resolution 2 would build out the existing canon on licensed lay ministries. It would do that in two primary ways, mainly by adding suggested descriptions of some of the lay ministries. The idea is to provide guides for the development and employment of the gifts and talents of the laity in the diocese. In addition, it would add authority for the bishop to license lay ministries. The genesis of this proposal was in a meeting of the ACNA Catechesis Task Force last March in Atlanta. As you might imagine, at the Catechesis Task Force meeting, there was a lot of discussion of the new Anglican Catechism and how to encourage and assist congregations in employing it. More generally, there was a lot of discussion about how Anglicans could up their game when it came to formation and discipleship. At one meeting, the chancellor of the Anglican Diocese of San Joaquin was there, and he said, you know, our diocese already has canons on lay catechists and several other lay ministries. You guys might want to take a look at those as a place to start in carrying out this task. So over the summer, some members of our committee pulled those canons and set to work on adapting them, language from San Joaquin for use in the Mid-Atlantic. The committee had a lot of discussions and revisions over the summer and early fall, but ultimately adopted Resolution 2 that's before you by unanimous vote. We also gave ourselves a period to allow reconsideration for about a week after that and decided not to reconsider it. Where we ended up is a proposal that has three significant changes from the model we took from San Joaquin. The first is that the descriptions you'll see of the offices are not mandatory qualifications. They're rather tools that a church may or may not decide to use, and so they give churches flexibility. Secondly, in adding licensing authority for the bishop, the proposal does not take away any of the existing authority of rectors, whereas in San Joaquin, it's more bishop-focused. And third, we do not propose creating a new diocesan committee, which would be a committee on lay ministries. San Joaquin has that. The two other things worth noting about it. First, this proposal only concerns lay ministries. It doesn't have anything to do with clergy. And secondly, there are two lay ministries in the current canon that we are not expanding in this proposal. Those are church planters and evangelists. So as to those two, the canon would remain unchanged. I'd be happy to answer any questions about why we left those two out. So that's where it came from. We adopted it by unanimous vote. We think it's a pretty good idea. As you heard from the bishop, there are some in the synod who may not be of that view, and some of them have spoken to me. And so there's some who might be of the view that some of this language should be tweaked, or that maybe there's a better way to go about upping our game in the area of lay ministries, or just that apart from the merits, this is a proposal that where it might be healthy to have a more extended, broader discussion within the diocese before we acted on something like this. So if that is your view, the committee wants to point something out, which is there is a motion you could make after I move adoption of our resolution that would be procedurally appropriate. It's called a motion to refer. You could move to refer this resolution back to the committee. And with all of that background, I think Well, I'd say, if that were to happen, then what would happen is that if there were further input people wanted to provide to the committee could take it in, and then next year, for next year's synod, the committee would take that into account in deciding what to propose or not to propose to the synod. And so with that, on behalf of the committee, I move that the synod adopt Constitution and Canons Resolution 2.
Very clear, very helpful, Kevin. Again, that's presented by the committee, does not need to be seconded. Jim?
Where the switch is.
It's
There.
on.
I would like to move that the amendment to Canon 3.6 be referred back to the committee.
Okay,
I don't know if
that
that
motion
needs a second.
is in order. Is there a second? Second. Discussion. Yes.
I really appreciate the work the committee's done. These are all really helpful areas. Maybe if they were presented as growing areas, I mean, 'cause for each of these areas, I think it could be reworded. But they're all helpful growing areas for all of us. And I appreciate the work the thought that's gone into it.
Thank you. If you're going to address it, it would be helpful actually to go to microphones. There's one here and one here so that everyone can hear. Tim, go ahead.
I had a question on section 2 under pastoral leader. May exercise pastoral or administrative responsibility, may be licensed to lead regularly the offices authorized with a common prayer. Would this person be authorized to actually celebrate communion, or is that, I wasn't sure about that.
Second.
It's under section 2.
I don't think that's contemplated, but there's another provision where it would be. Well, I mean, not actually celebrating, I'm sorry. You used the word celebrate.
Right.
No.
Okay, thank you.
John?
Yes, John, I fully support what you've done. I think if the church is going to move forward and evangelize and plant churches, we need everybody on team. And I like what you've done, and I fully support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie?
I question that this is the best way for us to up our game, that setting up more rules and regulations or guidelines isn't necessarily going to do that, that it's more of a understanding of what our mission is, and that that would be a better way to approach upping our game. And I would move to, I don't know what the language would be, but to defeat this.
We have a motion on the floor that we'll have to deal with first. Thank you. Sorry, Josh?
My name is Josh Kammer. As a church planter and a person leading apostles at Mason, at George Mason, I'm totally on board with the idea of needing to focus on the idea of catechesis and developing lay leaders. I don't know that the canons and constitutions is the place for us to do the really tough work of hashing that out. I think that's something that needs to be done among the clergy and among the lay leaders of the diocese, and in particular, in each of the parishes and in the church plants, the idea of how to do it specifically. I look at this and I'm concerned that this could be a hindrance to the furthering of church planting and the apostolic ministry that we're given. So I would recommend referring it back and let's take some more time to think about the basic issue of catechesis. What do we mean by that? And I say this on the heels of Monday of this past week, sitting with Lee Nelson, the chair of the Catechesis Task Force for the whole province, at the Simeon Fellowship gathering we had, where we talked about catechesis in great length all day long with Bishop Steve Breedlove of Pair USA. And out of that context, I think that the best option is not in the canons and constitutions.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Kathleen?
Yes, I'm completely on board with what Josh just said. My comment kind of goes along there. I don't quite understand what would be the purpose of referring it back to Constitution and canons, particularly if, as what I was going to say, that may not be the best place to discuss this. So what's the purpose of sending it back to Constitution and Canons Committee?
The purpose, as I believe the chairman indicated, an opportunity for further consultation with interested persons. I would assume that the committee would seek comment and there'd be an opportunity for further discussion. I think the Synod would want to do that if they felt there was more work that needed to be done than we could do as a committee of the whole here today.
So that would
Is that a
provide.
fair reason?
So that would provide an opportunity for, there to be clergy gatherings about it and lay gatherings about it, or churches
It would be
talking
up
about
to
it?
the committee to decide how to proceed.
How to get the input.
But they're the appropriate body. There is no other group that's appropriate to give
yeah.
a canonical amendment to our process gives the Constitution and Canons Committee the authority.
Okay, thank you.
Bishop.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Richard Hines with Restoration. Excuse me, I'm getting over a case of laryngitis. I'm speaking actually to the point that was just raised. I had actually misread your rationale to begin with. I thought that the ACNA canons required that each diocese establish standards for the ministry of laity, and I see no, that is not correct. It is just permissive that basically each diocese may establish. So in fact, to me, the basic question is, should there be standards? Obviously, our province hasn't made a decision on that question yet. Standards for the ministry of laity, and that raised for me the question whether the Constitution and Canons is the appropriate body to answer that question. Based on the previous discussion, I would just say I would invite you to the committee to proceed in that direction of saying, is it first of all necessary? Should we? Is it advisable to have standards for lay ministry? And if so, then who is it who should be developing those standards? And should the Constitution and Canons Committee be the appropriate body for that?
Very good. All right, the motion before us is to refer the matter to the committee. Are you ready to vote? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Nay. Motion carries. It is referred back to the Constitution and Canons Committee. With our thanks, Mr. Chairman, to you and to the committee.
Thank you. I will add one last point in response to one of the comments. Lee Nelson is an amazing guy. If you've not met him, find a way to get him to come to your church. You won't regret it.
Just a parenthesis, Josh Kammerer has been doing a great deal with using the catechism in discipleship at Apostles and at Apostles at Mason. I need to announce the result of our election for clergy for the Standing Committee. You have elected the Reverend Aaron Baer and the Reverend David Glade. So our thanks to for all those who have allowed their names to come forward for consideration on any of these offices, and to those who will be serving, thank you, and we're eager to move forward together. It's time to call again upon Heather Adams for some instruction about our workshop locations. Jean McCleary, would you see if Heather is standing outside and could be invited in?